Hi, welcome. So after the interesting plenary, I wanted to acknowledge that this research is based on a project that raised many ethical issues and worked with vulnerable populations, but that is not the topic of this paper. If you're interested in that, I've written about it in ACM Interactions in the November-December 2017 issue, and there's also a keynote at Interaction Design 2017 at Stanford that's on YouTube that deals with all sorts of issues of working with vulnerable populations, so I'm not going to touch on it here, but it's very much important in this work. So brain-computer interfaces are a relatively new and unexplored area in the field of human-computer interaction. To date, they have been used largely for entertainment and also to enable, as a controller, people for disabilities, but there's been really not a lot of work done on mental health. And there is an opportunity that exists to develop brain-computer interfaces that support mental health in terms of prevention, but also interventions for those who already have mental health challenges. And the goal of both of these is to improve mental health learning and long-term well-being. The focus of this particular piece of work in the Tokai paper is on the use of brain-computer interfaces to address mental health challenges with young children, 5 to 10 years old. And addressing mental health very early on is beneficial due to neuroplasticity, but also because it enables children to develop and practice behaviors and thoughts that help them understand the relationship between their mind and body and understand their mental health challenges and how to overcome them. In particular, it's been shown that learning how to self-regulate really early on in life is very, very beneficial for long-term well-being. So brain-computer interfaces, they enable data between people and computers to be communicated. A headset senses electronical impulses that are generated by the neurons in our brain, and that's sent to a computer program. Pretty straightforward. One form of BCI involves an EEG headset, and we can determine amplitude and frequency at different locations on the scalp, and that can help us understand a little bit more about cognitive states and affective states. And when they can display this information back to a user in a way that's understandable to them, that's called neurofeedback. So when we look at this technology for children, the problem is that most headsets are complex, fragile, require long sessions of calibration or training to account for individual differences which are pronounced in young children. And this kind of headset is clearly not going to work, ethics aside. And so there is an opportunity still. We have new commercially available, very simple headsets like this one that have a single dry electrode, and in this case it's on the left prefrontal cortex, and it can vaguely tell things like, am I calm or really agitated, am I paying attention, not paying attention. So it's fairly simple, non-invasive, and gives us some pretty noisy but generally able to disambiguate these kind of states. So the overarching research question for this 5-year project was, can we design neurofeedback brain-computer systems for children that are usable and effective at helping them learn to improve their ability to self-regulate feelings and thoughts? And there's a series about these different evaluations, some in Nepal, some of them in lower SES regions in Canada. That's not about this talk. This talk's about design knowledge. So the question I asked also is, what are the important design features of these systems that make them easy to use, that make them easy for children to learn to self-regulate and to promote repetitive practice? So here we're going to focus on this as a design research question. So my team had this opportunity to design and evaluate several different systems over a period of time, but each of them has a simple headset. It's connected with Bluetooth to a Unity app on a tablet. It's mobile. There's a series of games. The games change depending on the population. That's the basic system. There's an augmented system that goes with it. In the evaluations, we did 2 field studies with 50 children 5 to 10 years old who had severe challenges with anxiety and attention. And skipping all the results, the the systems were both usable and effective, and if you're interested in that, happy to send those papers to you. But the fact that we evaluated these systems shows some validity of our prototype that we then use to create design knowledge, and then we use that design knowledge to create some more prototypes, which we again evaluated. So we get this kind of validity around creating design knowledge with prototypes that we have a good sense are good exemplars of brain-computer interfaces in that they're usable and effective with very young children. So our goal is to create design knowledge now for this class of artifacts in the form of strong concepts, and strong concepts are sort of an intermediate level of design knowledge. It's somewhere between the particulars that would only apply to a very specific situation and to something more general that would apply to a large class. So we're going to target somewhere in between those things. The derivation process was iterative, and it was 6 steps. And this is one of the main contributions of the journal paper. But here I'm just going to pick out a few things. I can't talk about all of it. So there's some things that were really important. And the first was figuring out what are the challenges we need to overcome. So we started with a lit review. A lot of it was from clinical settings. We also interviewed counselors who work with children, and we did many design experiments. We came up with 5 challenges that we thought needed to be met for all neurofeedback brain-computer systems for young children if they're going to be usable and effective for teaching self-regulation. So I'm going to talk about the first 2 in detail and just touch on the other ones. And they all work together, so you can't really separate them out. The first one is interaction. So prior work has shown that children must understand the interaction model. They need to know how to change their brain state to interact with the system. And these kids are 5 years old, 5, 6 years old. They must know what to do and how to do it. And then prior work has also shown us that children must also get salient feedback related to their brain state that shows them in a way they can understand that they've done it right. And if they haven't done it right, they need to get corrective feedback that shows them what to do. So those are the 2 main things that you have to start with. There's a few other things that are quite important. One is, in doing all this, it can't detract from the target brain states that you're after. Another one is calibration. So these kids cannot sit still. They can't create a brain state in order to calibrate. So we have to tackle that, and we do. And then these very simple headsets are non-invasive and simple, and their data is extremely noisy and poor quality. So these are the 5 challenges we want to overcome. But the very first thing is what to do and how to do it. How do we teach children how to self-regulate using a brain-computer interface system? So here's some of our kids from Nepal. They're illiterate, they have suffered severe trauma, they don't speak English, and they don't use computers. So our approach was to work with them actively, not like passive neurofeedback where they just sort of don't have to actually engage. We wanted to teach them about their mind-body relationship, and so they need to know how to use their body to calm their brains. And in previous work, we have explored this idea of using embodied metaphor to help children learn and to make things clear to them. And so it seems to be quite useful for novel interfaces and to support learning. So quick background, embodied metaphor links experiences we have in our bodies, which are stored as image schemas in our brains and neural patterns, and these get extended through metaphor to help us understand and articulate ideas and concepts which are in our brains, and then we can talk about linguistically. So a simple example is the in-out or container image schema. It's formed very early on as we put things into and out of our mouths. We watch a parent go in and out of a room. We watch milk get poured into a glass and drank out of the glass. And these repeated patterns of body experience create these embodied image schemas, and they're stored, again, as neural patterns. Early in life, we start to extend or elaborate these through metaphor to understand other things we see, and concepts both concrete and abstract that we're trying to understand. So if you move all the way to the most abstract, you say things like, I am in love, I am falling in love, I am backing out of the agreement, let's leave out the details. And all of these use a simple in-out image schema. So in this way, embodied metaphors provide this link between a source domain, which is a familiar body experience, and then a target domain, which is usually a concept. So we're going to hijack that, and we're going to try and do something a little bit differently with it in our design. So we extend this approach, and we're going to base our interaction model on the relationship with body experiences and affective or cognitive states instead of concepts. And so this is going to help us address this challenge of what to do and how to do it. So we want to link a source domain, something in the body, the target domain and brain state through metaphor. And a very, very simple, I'm going to give you the most simple example, and we'll do harder examples later, is that soft breathing is calming. And you might say, well, that's not a metaphor, that's just what happens. But then you look at the kinds of language we use when we say things like there was only a breath of wind in the sky, and you realize, well, this guy's not breathing at all. This is actually a metaphor that we use, and it links these two things. So we're going to use this kind of structure for our interaction model. Okay, so then what we need to do is take this metaphoric relationship and we need to embed it into a familiar activity that will prompt a child to enact the desired body activity. So our classic case is the familiar activity of gently blowing on a pinwheel, which causes a pinwheel to spin as it would in everyday life. So a child sees a pinwheel on a screen or in real life, and they have a tendency to blow on it, and the blowing calms their brain. So using this design concept, we can get even really young children, 3-4 years old, to enact the body state that will shift their brain state. That's the target for self-regulation. In this case, it was calming down just a little bit. And we can represent this relationship metaphorically depicted through a familiar activity. So what to do, how to do it. Now, then we enter feedback comes into there, and this actually just falls into place, is that we want to have children know that they're interacting correctly, and if not, give corrective feedback that doesn't detract from the task. So the strong concept we use here is just to provide dynamic icons that are culturally specific. They represent the cause and effect relationship of the activity, no longer the body and the brain, but the activity itself. And we depict changes in the activity, here the pinwheel spinning, that reflect the child's current brain state. Okay. So a child already understands how the pinwheel works. They can see if they're getting it right, and if not, they know how to correct it. Either they're blowing too heavily or they're not blowing at all, and they know immediately, 5 years old, how to correct this. So there's the first two challenges. It turns out this particular activity was designed because doing this activity does not detract from trying to calm down a little bit. We actually created real-time calibration on a second device that's done in real time to this activity, and then all of our activities tolerate noise because the speed of the pinwheel moving does not have to be precise. So in this particular very simple example, we've met all these challenges. So it turns out these ideas worked for other games and activities that we've built, including teaching children to self-regulate, to sustain relaxation, to sustain attention, to shift sadness, to mediate pain, and to practice sustained attention. So before I show you another case, so we've derived this knowledge, now we're going to test it out. It's really important that understanding no design framework is generated or can subsequently be used in isolation of a design process. There's always a design process. So here we've identified some really key factors that I think are really critical when you're going to use these concepts. And the first one is to generate and identify these familiar activities and these culturally specific icons, you need to do extensive site visits. This is really important in different cultures. It's even important in our own cultures that we think we know really well. We take notes, we photograph. In this case, the pinwheel was an iconic representation we saw all over Nepal and India, but it also turned out to be familiar in Vancouver, Canada. So we used it in various places. So that's one thing. You have to do site visits. You also have to work with stakeholders, and this definitely ties into ethics. And we cultivated very strong relationships with stakeholders, including the children themselves, their parents, their caregivers, and we had to be willing to iterate through our designs. And so that's critical. You can't use these concepts without doing that. We need to use a common language, and the concepts give us that common language, so we use that language, we explain it to the stakeholders on the site visits, and it helps us through our design process. And of course, that speaks to the second one, which is iterative refinement. So this is not a process that happens once and it's over with. We go round and round and keep doing it until we get it right, and our stakeholders tell us when we've got it right, and our children tell us when we've got it right. And then we're ready to actually go do an intervention. So after we developed our framework, we had the opportunity to work with several new populations, and one of those was an Aboriginal population in northern British Columbia, north of Vancouver. And they live in a forested nature environment by the ocean. And so we used our framework, we used our common language to generate a variation of the original system working with them. And there's a series of games, so I'm going to show you one that's a little more complicated. And the goal of this game is to sustain, to hold a calm state for a period of time, which can be set in real time, how long that needs to be. And so the similar interaction metaphor, stillness is calm, is embedded into two familiar activities to these kids, and one of which is using an iPhone to take a picture, and the other is playing hide and seek in the forest. So here, they stay still, hiding behind the tree, to use an iPhone to capture a photo of their power animal, which is a bear. And so that takes in their power, metaphorically, and if they can't stay still, they wiggle around, the tree moves, the bear backs up, and the raven swoops down, because Raven is the trickster in their mythology, and eats their smoked salmon, and then no more bear, and you have to start over. So, same idea. But when they sustain calm, and you can again adjust the threshold for this, they capture the picture of their power animal on their iPhone, and then do this repetitively to collect tokens. So that's another example where these criteria are met in a different kind of context for self-regulation with a different population. And we worked really, really closely with the community on this to get some of the imagery right and the ideas right, and it went through multiple iterations. Okay, that was sustained calm. More recently, we've had a very amazing and challenging opportunity to work with children with cancer. And this project is at a conceptual level still. The goal is to help them reduce acute pain when they're going through procedures. And so we start again with our metaphors. So when we talk about reducing pain, and when children are coached on reducing pain, which comes from our site visits, they're told things like that you need to focus in on the pain, spiral down into the pain, don't try and run away from the pain. So we start to think about that and look at what that can look like in pain reduction, and we start to brainstorm different ideas around that, so we can have a staircase or a shell or a spider web, although we'd probably rule that out because the children would be afraid of it. And you get these different spiral activities, and actually where we're heading with this one is going down like a luge slide down a mountain, and it's all icy, and the ice is kind of made of snow and ice cream, and anyway, so you get this idea of how these kind of things play out. And there's lots of instantiations of the metaphor you can play with, and then you have to make sure they fit your other strong concepts. So far, these concepts have been applied in designs for brain-computer interfaces: calming down, sustaining calm, sustaining attention, selective attention, shifting sadness, mediating pain. There's probably others. These are just the ones that we've tackled so far. It's possible we'll hit some that doesn't work for. It's possible there are other important things we're not seeing. And so we think this contribution is really to open up this design space, which is a very, very challenging space, but has an amazing potential to help very young children develop self-regulation skills, which will have an impact for their entire lives on their well-being. So we really want to open this space up and invite other researchers in brain-computer interfaces, design researchers, health researchers, practitioners, and educators to come work with us. So if you're interested at all in this work, please, please drop me a line. Thank you. And of course, a project is never possible without the funders and all the children who do these crazy ideas with us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. We do have a few minutes for questions, so please, if you have any questions for Alissa. I see someone running.
So one thing you talked about that seemed important for the design concerns especially was the sort of image schema, Lakoff and Johnson-y style way of thinking about sort of the relation between these kind, I suppose, tacit knowledge and this sort of linguistic knowledge. And I was wondering, so that's sort of like one sort of view in which we might want to, a model of metaphor here, right? A model of how we'd want to understand the relation between those things. And I was kind of wondering, If you could perhaps maybe expand on that
Sure,
a little
we've
bit.
done 10 years of research on that, and I'd be really happy to send you some of the papers.
Cool, yeah.
They get better over time. We get better at explaining it. So it's not tacit knowledge, actually. It's the idea that we have body patterns of action that we leverage when we're thinking about or interpreting visual cues, auditory cues, when we're thinking about concrete and abstract concepts, and those same neural patterns fire when we're thinking about it as if we'd move. So if we can get the kids to move in those ways, it actually gives them, it leverages or bootstraps them to go towards where we want. So we just took that one step further into brain states. But we have all sorts of work on it. I'd just love to share with you if you fire me an email.
Cool, yes, I definitely will.
Thanks, very interesting talk. Vivian Wash from George Mason University. I was curious about how you close the loop between the brain interfaces and the interventions that you provide. Could you elaborate a bit more on the algorithm?
Right, and there's lots of details on that in the evaluation papers. So we did, we did multiple studies, so they're all slightly different, but basically we trained non-experts in how to use our system because we want to always build capacity where we are. We don't want to be researchers parachuting in. So we train people in those locations to use our systems, and then they work with the kids, and we do have a protocol, and it's somewhere between 18 to 24, 10 to 12-minute sessions with the kids over a period of 6 weeks. We have certain things we know we should say when we're coaching them, but they're really simple things. There's nothing very complicated about the protocol. Does that answer your question? I'm happy to send you the protocol. But yeah, so it's, I guess the thing that's most important about that protocol is that the child has a good relationship with the person who's helping them with the intervention. And sometimes they're not helping at all. They're just sitting there doing nothing. And other times they're going, hey, don't forget to take a deep breath, or you could try this. And the coaching is pretty subtle, but they need to have a good relationship with that person, whether it's a parent or a counselor at school or a researcher who they've connected with.
Thanks.
Hello, Adas from IDC Ertilia. I wanted to know your thoughts about using such a great interface that is adjusted to kids and how it may support the neurofeedback effect, which is great as a product, but how can you later differentiate the effect of the neurofeedback from the effect of the design?
You can't, right? So for neurofeedback to work, it has to be well designed. If it's well designed but it's not neurofeedback, it's not going to work. We did actually do a study where we basically disconnected the headset from the app with university students. So half the group was getting real neurofeedback, and the other half thought they were, but they weren't. And we do see a difference. Mm-hmm. So, and we have both subjective and objective measures. We have self-report, but then we also can see their brainwave data in real time, so we know what's happening with them. So, yeah, we've done a bunch of little mini experiments I mentioned first, and some of them were, can the headsets differentiate these brain states? Can we fake it and see, is it just expectation playing out here or not? So we've done a bunch of those things, but it has to be well designed.
Yeah, so in terms of self-regulation, you don't think that the design itself may help the kids to self-regulate their emotions?
Just by saying blow on a pinwheel?
No, the design, just by seeing the animation and, I don't know, maybe just interacting with it somehow, without the neurofeedback
So
itself.
what that would do is it would show them what they should do, but it wouldn't tell them they were doing it right. And so what we see with the kids, so for example, we also worked with teachers to transfer into the classroom, and the teachers would say, hey, imagine you're blowing on a pinwheel, and sometimes that worked and sometimes that didn't work, but it always worked in the intervention because they immediately know if they're doing it right or not, if that kind of breathing, or there's other things they had to do with their bodies if they're actually working. So I think it's fairly clear that having some feedback early on learning something is going to be better than no feedback at all.
Great. Let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you for staying.
Yeah, and thank you for